Well, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining. It is the end of January already, which feels like just the whole month just kind of flew by. But welcome to Esports Ed. We are the Bytespeed webinar podcast style once a month gathering. It's been about 2 months since we last met, so it's really awesome to see some familiar names in the participant list. So thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I think the last time we were together was early December when we announced the NACAD partnership with also someone from Grandview University. But tonight, as always, we're sponsored by Microsoft. So a big shout out to them for sponsoring Esports Ed. And let's kind of get into the agenda for tonight. We have our topic tonight is going to be all about running successful esports events. I think this is a really impactful kind of topic that doesn't get enough attention, I think, because a lot of people just think, oh yeah, you just pull teams together and you can run a tournament, or, you know, we're going to host a coaching clinic or something like that, and we're just going to throw a bunch of people in a room and it's going to work. So we wanted to give this kind of this overall topic a little bit of love. And with me tonight, I think, is one of the best TOs in the country when it comes to running esports events. And that's not me just saying things because she's a friend of mine, but I'd like to introduce Dana Husted from Grandview University. She's the director of esports over there. And Dana, I would love for you to kind of just let everybody know who you are.
Awesome. Well, my name is Dana Husted, and I am the Director of Esports at Grandview University in Des Moines, Iowa. I have now been here since the beginning of starting that in 2017. Basically, you can think of me as like that athletic director type, recruiting, scholarshiping, daily operation management, doing TOing, obviously, and running events. I just really enjoy helping the students and giving them a really good opportunity. And I'm very competitive, so fitting in this world has been really good for me. And I'm very excited to share some of my knowledge with you tonight on how you can make impact in your own schools, K-12, college, open local tournaments, and things like that, and things to focus on. So thanks for having me tonight, Josh.
Yeah, thanks so much for taking time out of your Wednesday night to be with us. For those of you that might not know me, my name's Josh Knutson. I'm the director, or the Esports Solutions Director here at Bytespeed. I've been with the company for about 2 years now. It'll be 2 years later this spring. And I am a former collegiate head coach. I started back in October of 2016 at the University of Jamestown in North Dakota. And I've been in my current role since May of 2019, basically serving as a resource for the schools that we work with and the different organizations that we help support on the technical side, you know, lending my esports knowledge of building a program and kind of running that for a couple of years. That's where a lot of my background comes from. And Dana and I have been friends, and programs have competed against each other. And I think she's, like I said, one of the best TOs in the country when it comes to running esports events. So I'm really excited to have her knowledge with us tonight as we kind of tackle this subject. So the topics for tonight, we're kind of going to split it up into two kind of categories. Number one, we'll talk about preparing and running live or online tournaments. That's, I think, the biggest part of tonight will be focused on, you know, actually, what does it take to pull together an esports event, pull together teams, run a tournament that stays on schedule, all of those things. And then, you know, Dana's got some experience in setting up clinics as well. Des Moines has hosted a coaching clinic for the last, 4 years now. 4 years, I think, is coming up here.
This is year 4. Wow.
Yeah, which is crazy. Yeah. So the Coaches Association, NACAD, has run their clinic at Dana's school for 4 years now. And she's been a big part of the success of that clinic. And we'll kind of get some insight on running those type of events as well. And then, of course, at the end of the session, we're going to kind of keep things to about 45 minutes to an hour, with the last little bit of that being a Q&A so that you guys can ask questions. You know, we can have some back and forth. We try and really keep these webinars conversational. Don't feel like you have to wait until the Q&A if something comes up that you need an answer on or you want to learn more about. Feel free to type it in the chat or the question and answer section for the webinar tonight. Both of those are active, and I'll be watching them as we go. And like I said, we want this to be a back and forth. We want to be resources for you and help you learn tonight. So we can just dive in here and let's start talking about tournaments. And kind of, I separated this out into a lot of different key areas, but it all starts with preparing for the event. So Dana, when you're kind of thinking about putting on a tournament, what are some of the first things that you look at as far as, the prep that you as the tournament organizer needs to do?
Yeah, well, one, I would like to just make sure that everybody knows that you need to make sure you have a very clear plan of what the objective of your tournament is, right? Are you trying to do something locally? Is it charity? Are you doing a competitive collegiate event? There's just a lot of those things. So, really fleshing out that exact plan and what you're trying to accomplish is also going to set you up for that future success. So, what is that event main goal? And then I would say you really need to be able to dive in and research, okay, what games am I going to provide, right? What makes sense for my community? And also looking at what's going on in your current surrounding community. You don't want to be hosting a tournament that somebody else in your town is also having on the same exact day and you're dividing, right? Because gaming is about bringing those people together. And so I think it's really important that one, you're very aware of your surroundings, right? And then also making sure that it's not like a saturated market either. Are people going to show up if it's a LAN event? Have they been to one just last weekend? And looking at those kind of things. Is your price too high? All of those kind of things of entry fees, barriers, that kind of stuff. I think another really key part would be researching who is your competition going to be. So if you are at a K-12 level, you typically are going to be looking for just providing the best possible opportunity to get to play a lot of games, just like traditional sports, right, Josh, where you want to go to a tournament during the day and get as much as you can out of that time, give all the kids the experience. And the same kind of goes for these collegiate tournaments, whether that is it more of a leisure tournament or is it competitive? And then choosing who that competition is going to be. Is this going to be an open, or is this going to be a strictly collegiate or strictly high school? What rank caps and that kind of decision making also goes into that. And then what are the tools that you're going to need to make it a successful event? You really have to be straightforward and really be prepared for all of the things that could go wrong. For me, that's how I think a lot of the time I have ran successful events, is because I'm prepared for A, B, C, and D to happen, and I have 10 other plans ready at the end of the day to cover if something were to occur. If that means electrical problems, internet problems, teams not showing up, all the miscellaneous things that can happen in our industry. So that's kind of where I would start at.
Sure. No, those are all great points. And I think the background information on, what's going on at that point in time is really important for making sure that you're successful and that the people that come to your event have a good experience when they're actually there and going through, whatever style of a tournament or clinic or whatever it might be, making sure that, whoever's coming and attending gets the most out of it that they can. So let's kind of talk about some of the checklist things that you need to have when you're kind of looking at building out a tournament. Obviously, number one is a schedule. How many days is this tournament going to be? Is it going to be a 1 day, a 2 day, a week long? Can you, Dana, speak to a little bit of the challenges of running an event that goes just 1 day versus a longer period of time? Or, maybe the longer tournaments have their own unique challenges that need to be addressed.
Sure. So let's start with 1 day tournaments, okay? And I think those can be really effective, and it makes families happy, it makes kids happy, it also saves on costs, right? Depending on if this is a collegiate event, is it a K-12 event? Those are the things that are also going to be impactful of, does it need to be 1 day or 2 days? Is there a really large prize at the end too? So that's going to factor in of how you determine the days that you need to be providing. Now in collegiate, I think that some of the effective ways of choosing the amount of days does determine is based on like that prize pooling, and that's what we've kind of had to do at Grandview when we run our tournament. So if you're doing a 1 day tournament, you want to make sure that you have enough space and machines, right? So the venue is going to be extremely important in that, of how you can determine also what those days are. I think a lot of people underestimate the amount of space it takes in order to actually run a tournament at a large scale. Even 4 to 8 teams can take 24 to 30 machines if you want to really run it effectively. Depending on the game, too, right? Is it 5 players, 3 players, 6 players? That also factors into, game times as well. And I think you really have to make sure that you're able to dial in on how long our game's going to be taking, how much space do I have, what machines do I have possible, and then what is the correct format. I think a lot of people are mistaken when they decide, oh, what we're going to do a double elimination bracket. Well, is that really effective for a one-day tournament if you're playing best of threes? It's almost impossible to get that done in a day, right? So it does take a lot of common sense, honestly, and I don't think if you don't have a lot of experience putting on events or understanding how long games take, people are misled in understanding that esports events then can be miserable for a lot of people. You could be at a venue for 12 or 16 hours, and that is just not okay either. So determining how you're going to do that is very important on what games you're offering, and then how many teams you're going to be inviting. And then it comes down to what bracket play you're going to play: single elim, double elim, Swiss round robin. There's just so many kinds, right? And how we're going to play through that. Are there going to be tiebreaker eliminators, all of those things? So you really have to be able to decide, okay, if it's a one-day event and it's for fun, you can really knock through games. I think those are very effective. It's good for younger kids, smaller attention spans. And if it's where people are not traveling a long ways, right? If it's a LAN event, then I would say we're going to be looking at 2-day tournaments for the more robust. That happens with a lot of collegiate tournaments as well as championship bracketings, that kind of stuff. You want to be able to give those players time, one, to be playing a game and then take a little break and reset and play again. We all are always preaching we don't want to be sitting at a computer for 12 hours a day, and neither do the players. We still need to be able to make sure that we give them proper breaks for mental and physical strain. 2-day tournaments work, or even 3-day tournaments work really well when you're trying to bring a lot of teams together and you want to make it an actual event supplemented with other fun activities either in the area. Do you want to have like a lot of hospitality added to it? And that's where I really like to cater to the teams that come to Grandview for the NACAD Classic. We like to bring in 12 to 16 teams over a 2 or 3 day period, and we're playing a lot of games. For a really large prize pool, right? But we also have a lot of fun activities. We have the clinic going on at the same time. What are you going to supplement your event with to keep people wanting to come back and having you do it again?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of different considerations that go into, what your schedule is going to look like, the number of teams, number of games, all of those different things with the venue and the other items that are happening at the same time. So in kind of building out your schedule, I think deciding, what is my bandwidth to have, a multiple day tournament, or, could we do it all in one day? That's a really important question to ask early on. And then, Jeff brings up a really good point about virtual events and things like that, where you might have a little bit more flexibility in a schedule for something that's not travel oriented, where you don't have to worry about, okay, well, we have a physical venue that we have to worry about. As far as like virtual schedules go, I know you've run a couple of different tournaments with ASU being primarily online. Can you talk about what that process looks like for scheduling games and trying to get lots of different people on the same page as far as, hey, we're playing in different areas. It might be within the same state or the same, region. How does scheduling work for something like that, where we're not necessarily coming to a building?
Yeah. I would say, in my personal opinion, I really do like running online events or leagues, just because you don't have the factor of having a venue, right? Or all of the things that can go wrong at a venue. And also, what that cost is too. So you can very much run an effective online tournament. I think that a lot of people, have seen now through COVID, we have thrived by, adapting all of our leagues and seasons to all online tournaments and events and clinics. So, when we went through those processes, it really came down to, okay, what is the most or the best night for all these teams to come, and making sure that you just have a common denominator day. Is it going to be over a month of time, right? Depending on what kind of format you have and how many teams. Again, this is all factors that go into determining it. So with ASU GSV specifically, we chose to play all of the first and second round games over a month long. And the games had to be played by a default time that we had set during the week. Okay, so it was like a Thursday and a Saturday games had to be played by, and teams would then have to report their scores. We would then fill the bracket through, and then they'd play their next round by the next week at the default time. We found that it was effective, and I've also seen a lot of other online leagues have a very effective schedule in similar ways. Then you came together and had to play those semifinals and the finals on a dedicated day on a Saturday, because that was the best time it's scheduled through all the other seasons that they were playing, right? You're navigating a lot of competition, whether you are in K-12 or collegiate obviously more so. But there's a lot of games during the week, and what night is good for teams, and they do need nights off. And making sure that you're also going to get good broadcast time. Is there going to be another massive event that's going to take away from your viewership? You definitely don't want to be having your event during those other large events, right? Now, here's one that a lot of leagues and seasons are going to. I've seen a lot of this in K-12 and collegiate lately, where the seasons may be 6 weeks. And when you are registering for it, they make sure that the night of the week that it's happening. It's on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. You always know you're going to have a game that night. It's a great scheduling tool. And then you go to the next week, because all the other teams had to have their games done by a default time. It's an effective way to work through, get a lot of teams' games, and also not have like an overload of one day of play. I think it is good to spread it out. Now, if it is trying to be like a Hugh Fest, I'm not sure if any of our guests are familiar with Hugh Fest, but it is. It's a 2-day, very rigorous tournament, and you play a lot of games for a lot of hours. Now, that's a different situation where you have to pack those games in because of one, broadcast time and the people that they hire and those kind of things. So online is 100% effective.
Awesome. No, great points there. As we've talked a little bit about kind of venue considerations, let's shift gears and really kind of dive into that a little bit. When you're looking at hosting an event and the venue question pops up, what are some of the things that you're looking for in that space? Some of the key considerations that you want to make when kind of looking at, okay, where are we actually going to hold this tournament?
Right. I think the biggest thing you have to make sure is, one, is their internet connection that's good enough to supply your event, as well as electrical. Our machines are taking, five some circuits, right? Like, you have to know how many circuits you can divide out, and what that building holds, and then also the space inside the building. What kind of tables and chairs are already there? Are you going to have to bring all that kind of stuff in? Because sometimes there's certain tables at venues that just don't work for what we do. You might think so, but it really doesn't work. I would say that when you also are looking at your venue, understanding that you are probably going to have to either schedule extra time, which can also be financially a burden as well. So that where it comes down to effectively managing your time and making sure games are starting on time and you're moving through your schedule. I think one reason why a lot of people do like some of the tournaments that we run is because we're always ahead of schedule, which is rare for our industry. I don't know. Do you have any other commentary on venues that you want to bring up?
Yeah, I would say there's a couple of different things that you want to look for. Our next topic is hospitality. Do you have a room set aside for the teams to have kind of like their base camp, drop their stuff off, be able to come in between games when they're not playing and hang out? That's not just like, thrown in the middle of a giant, or if it's a concert hall or a hotel ballroom or something like that, or like at Grandview, a student center. Do you have a place for the teams to kind of call home and debrief? Actually competition space. Do you have enough physical feet to be able to fit in, 5 PCs all next to each other, or, the different stations for, hey, we have 8 games going on at the same time. That means, there's 16 teams playing at one time. do we have enough actual physical space to fit all of that into one space, or do we need to look at another room? Those are kind of some other things to keep in mind when you're selecting a venue. If you're, in the middle of summer or the middle of winter, what's the heating and cooling situation? It's not something that people think about, but it is important, especially when you throw a bunch of bodies into one space. In the middle of summer or like late spring, is it going to get really, really hot in that venue? Do you have fans or access to central air? Those are kind of the things that don't get brought up when you're looking at venues, but things to keep in mind, just because keeping people comfortable, not only spectators, but also the players and everybody working the event. If, you kind of have those things checked off, they're going to make your event move a lot smoother as you go along.
I would also want to say too with a venue is that you want to make sure that it's visible. You don't want to be having this in multiple different small rooms that if you were really trying to get spectators right, that's in that situation. You want to have it in an open area. Is there a stage that's able to be set up? Are there viewing areas? I think it's really important that you don't just cram people in different rooms because you can, and that's the only space you have. Because if you're trying to really do an event correctly, you want them to be seen. That's kind of what they're working up for every day that they're practicing. The LAN events are something that is a really rewarding experience for players, and you want to do your best job to make sure that they are getting the recognition that they deserve.
Yeah, absolutely. And just kind of one final thing, I want to make sure that when you're looking at a venue, make sure that you get something that's not too big as well. There were a couple of events that I've been to where a large athletic gym or stadium was kind of rented out, and it feels like there's a lot of open space, and it makes the overall event feel like there's not a lot of people there, even when there is like 100 people in the stands. So it's kind of finding the balance between enough space and how many people and equipment you're going to actually need for the tournament is something that you'll have to look at when selecting a place to actually rent out or renovate and use. Let's kind of move to hospitality here. A lot of different events will pull together different things for the teams competing. When we ran the Rift of the North 2 years ago here in the spring up in Fargo, we were over at MSUM. We pulled together kind of goodie bags for all of the players. Just something to thank the teams for traveling. Some teams came from up to 8 hours away. So having a little bit of a thank you gift to give to the players, even if they didn't walk home with a check for a grand prize, it was still worth their time. They got a lot of great competition in, but they also felt like they were treated like, they were still important, even if, they weren't winning. So those things are pretty common, especially for events, having either a small bag with like your local tourism board throwing things in, things like hotel coupons or restaurant flyers or things like that. Bottled water. We did HyperX water bottles for all the players that came. Just, it doesn't have to be overly exorbitant. You don't have to spend a ton of money, but having those little player bags or something to give to the team as a thank you, I think is really important. And then I kind of touched on having a space for them when they're not actually playing. I think that goes a long way to making sure that the teams have a good experience when they're playing. Anything to add, Dana, as far as hospitality stuff goes?
Yeah, and I would just like to say that these people remember that they want to go back to an event based on who is running your event. If you just got to really focus on who the people are volunteering, who are working your check-in desk and registration, who's helping with IT management. All of those factors are very important to the player experience and the team experience. And teams, I've been to tournaments and taken my teams to events, and we said we're never going back there because of just the way it ran, and the people were not very kind. I think it's just very important that you make sure that you leave a good mark on people, and that people remember your event then, and they want you to keep having it. I always get calls that say, can you do more of those? Can you do it even online? We just want to play, and we want to be able to see, you do what you like to do. And that's rewarding in itself.
Yeah, and it's definitely, if you can leave a good impression on the teams and on the players, especially, making sure that the kids have a good time actually participating, that goes a long way into kind of following along with the mission of why so many schools have programs. It's giving those great opportunities for those students. And the hospitality side of running an event it might seem like a small thing, but it can make a really big impact long term and even in the short term. So um, as far as TOing stuff goes and rules and all that stuff, I think we'll get to that in a second. But let's talk about more of like the marketing and promotion and kind of the cost of doing an actual event. Um, you know, Certainly you're going to have venue costs and things like that. And marketing and promotion are going to cost a little bit of money depending on how you go about doing that. But actually promoting your tournament, there's kind of a science that goes along with that. Reaching out to the certain teams that you want to invite, whether it's a statewide event or maybe you're doing the state championship for your state high school league. How do you promote that to be able to get sponsors or other people interested in lending a hand? Kind of all three of these next sections, the marketing, the costs, and the funding, all kind of tie together. And I would love, Dana, for you to kind of talk about
Yeah.
how you promote your tournament and how do you kind of go about funding it, as well as talk about some of the hidden costs that might be in there.
Yeah, I'm going to touch up on that marketing and promotion really quick because I think it's very important that you're executing the communication plan. And that means the engagement through the communication tool. And you're going to have several of those. And then also looking for some sort of volunteer scouting among that as well. You are not only marketing your event, but you're also needing to promote your event because it is expensive, and this is why you do need volunteers. You need local TOs or maybe even just local people who like to help out in gaming areas, or they're just passionate about being around events. You'd be very surprised at how many people you can find in your community that will volunteer to help save you on some of these financial costs. Now, when we talk about the cost of what it will be to put on your tournament, a lot of times your largest amount is going to come from your venue cost. And that's why it's really important to make local or regional partnerships with someone. Give them a benefit of being a sponsor of your event, right? And maybe they'll allow you to use their venue for either at a discounted or maybe even free. I think it's very important that you do utilize your local and regional sponsorships and partnerships very well. And you'd be surprised that a lot of the colleges or K-12s already have those direct ties, and it just takes a phone call. And you can save on that venue cost. The other cost that you're going to run into is equipment. Not many people have the ability to run large tournaments because they lack the equipment, right? If you're trying to run a 12 team event and you only have 10 computers, that's not going to work, right? It's going to take you 4 days to get through or 5 days to get through the event. So, a lot of times you're able to contact companies and actually rent equipment out. You may even be able, if you're a K-12 in here, you may be able to even contact, a Bite Speed, right? They're always willing to talk about those kind of things. But then also maybe local colleges that have esports, right? They can use that also as a revenue generator for themselves. And so it doesn't hurt to make that ask. There's also a couple other companies that they'll lend out their equipment, and that means PC as well as monitor, and it comes with electrical and internet cords as well, because that also is a very hefty cost, because if you don't have 50 Ethernet cords to run 50 machines, man, that can add up really quickly. Ultimately, it comes down to that infrastructure cost, right? You have equipment, internet, and electrical. That's where your costs are going to be coming from, along with the venue. Your marketing and promotion, honestly, should not be costing you like a crazy amount of money if you're utilizing your media channels correctly. Use your local papers or your social medias. That's the king right now. Making sure that you are effectively putting quality materials out with all the information. Create a website that has all of the registration information, local hotels, how they can contact people. The more information you give, the better. it takes away from all those little piddly questions that come in via email that you're answering for days and days if you don't run your tournament correctly. Overall, our tournament, because of partnerships that we are probably running on about an $8,000 to $10,000 price to run our tournament. Now we do make a lot of that back via sponsorships as well, where we're actually getting cash donations to help offset that cost, as well as entry fees. That is how we're able to, help that sticky cost that comes with having to run a tournament. Now, I'm not saying that it will cost all of you that. You could run a tournament for less than $1,000 if you wanted to, right, Josh?
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
not necessary to be putting on something extravagant. That's just because we have to have so many machines, and our equipment is the bulk of that cost.
Yeah, no, all great things to kind of bring up and talk about, and they're kind of all interwoven as far as how you fund it. You can offset costs with sponsorship, and that might help your venue costs come down. And utilizing your partners, I think, is the big key takeaway, especially for those two areas.
Yeah.
I think you hit the nail on the head, and we're already at 7:30 already. So I think we'll kind of jump to the next section, and let's talk about actually running the tournament, and kind of the different rules and licensing, and kind of all of the things that you need to have set in place for the actual day of. I think one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that some games or some publishers require you to have a community license. Can you talk about what that process looks like, and explain kind of why that's important?
Yeah. So, but while you're deciding, before you even decide to put on a tournament, right, you need to decide what game is that going to be, or games. And most publishers right now of games have published community guidelines on their websites that you can find. That is where you're going to be able to see if they require you to be asking for permission, or they allow you to do it with certain requirements that go along with putting on a tournament. If you do have to request for certain games, you actually have to go through a process, and that typically can also be found on their community guidelines page. And it can be a rigorous process, but it can also be easier through some of them, right? If they know the reason you're doing it, they have a lot of these rules in place as is to make sure that you're not necessarily profiting on having a ton of these tournaments, right? Or they have caps on it for how much money you can make in a year by putting on tournaments. It's very, very important that you're reading these community guidelines, because people don't always realize that they also may have registration fee rules on it. You may not be able to charge a registration fee, but you can have an event venue fee. You may not be able to have or you may be able to charge a entry fee, but it has to be a certain amount, and that amount actually has to be applied to the prize pool, and it can offset the cost of what it takes to run the tournament. It can't actually be for profit. So these community guidelines are very, very important before you even determine if you're going to do it, because there are some games you will run into that you want to do, but it's just not possible, or you need to be able to get a amateur license in the NBA if you want to run like the pro games. The NBA 2K stuff can get very hairy. And whereas with the Riot, with League of Legends, if you want to have a game, you have to go through a process and apply for it, and they have to be able to publish it on their community board, right? And they also now have how many teams can participate, how much money can be in the prize pool, as well as what that entry fee can be. So it's extremely important to understand that you can't just decide one day and wake up and you're going to have a tournament at the end of the week. It is a process that you have to plan for.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really important thing to do kind of in that preparation for the event, and making sure you dotting your I's and crossing your T's so that you can run a successful event, and there's, you're following the guidelines for a successful tournament. How, when you're deciding the rules and how you're going to select participants and things like that, a lot of that will depend on, who your audience is. Are you a high school league, or are you running an intramural tournament? Are you a college doing an invitational, things like that. But as far as the rule set goes, a lot of that will be dictated by the game. But are there any tips that you can kind of give as far as like, okay, building out a specific list of things that you want in a rule sheet for a specific tournament.
Yeah, and I think the good thing that right now all the games do a really good job of establishing their rule sets that are online that are pretty universal, right? Knowing what you can pick and ban. If a new champion comes out, say in a League of Legends tournament that came out 2 days before the tournament, you're going to place a rule in that says this is disabled for this weekend because of X, X, and X. We don't know if it's going to be an effective champ or it'll break or will cause issues in the game, right? Those are things that you have to add in on the fly. But typically with the rules, you talk about how the seeding happens is extremely important. You need transparency. And you also need to make sure you're including, what are tiebreakers. I think that's a big one that people always don't realize can cause a lot of problems, and it can come down to a second. Honestly, some people have it based on time, and that can cause a lot of chaos, right? And these rule books are extremely important that the players are reading them and staff are reading them far prior to the tournament. And it is lucky though that these publishers in the games have it typically their set of rules that you can go off of, and you can also add as you see fit. And when you're choosing participants, it really does come down to, again, your objective of the tournament. Is this a collegiate competitive invitational, or is it a collegiate open where only college teams can come, but it's any skill, or you might have a skill gap on it, right? You want or a cap. I want only platinum players in this tournament, and that's the only teams we're accepting, and you give those rank requirements. You say nobody less than masters can play in this other tournament. You also may say that no former pro players can play in a tournament, or maybe this is an amateur only tournament, or a K-12, or like a high school only tournament. There's just so many ways that you can focus on, okay, what is the experience you want your students to get out of it, right? Ultimately, it's about, is it going to be extremely competitive, and is it for a large prize pool, or is it a more fun thing and you want to be able to let people play and hang out? There's just a lot of ways to choose how you're going to do your participants.
Definitely. And the last thing kind of in this list on this page is the broadcast stuff. And I think it's really common for, all events will run broadcast in a couple of different ways. But typically there's one or two broadcast booths that are set up, and they'll highlight, maybe it's a game per round, or maybe it's, we're going to broadcast every semifinal game and the finals, or, key games throughout the event. Maybe it's just a draw, and any game in the schedule can get picked for broadcast. But typically, if you're going to broadcast a game during a tournament, you'll have either shoutcasters that are volunteers or that you're paying to come in and do that. Maybe it's coaches or players from some of the teams that aren't playing in that time slot can sometimes come in and run a broadcast. That's how we did it for the Rift of the North tournament. We had actually Dana and I's friend Teddy Delaney, who was another college coach. He actually flew out and hung out with us for the weekend and did some shoutcasting. And we also had some of my players jumped in the booth. But we just provided another station, off in a not soundproofed room, but a room that was away from kind of the shouting of the crowd. And then, provided a microphone and a webcam and things like that. And then they just joined the custom game of whichever game that they were broadcasting. And then we had a Twitch channel made, or a YouTube channel made for the event. And I think that's pretty common. Sometimes those broadcast channels can be, the schools that are playing will broadcast. Are there any hurdles or kind of bumps that you've seen, Dana, with broadcasting and things that you need to keep in mind if you're going to do, a live production of a tournament?
Yeah, I think the big one is just making sure that you don't ever call yourself an official tournament of so-and-so's game. That can cause a lot of problems, and you don't want that to be either broadcasted or even your tournament title. That's also something to remember when you are making the plan of what it's going to be called, because there are all these publishers say you are not allowed to say that we're the ones supporting this. We support communities to put on tournaments, but we are not supporting you specifically in calling yourselves an official partner of this to run this tournament. Also with broadcasting, I would just say like on Twitch, making sure that if it is like a specific rated game, that you make that very clear and like it shows that on the Twitch page. You know, are you mature audiences, right? And I think that's also important. Overall, I think with Twitch, it's a really great tool and we're able to utilize it very well. And you should be. If you want visibility and you want player and program development, it's extremely important to be broadcasting, shoutcasting those games and getting them airtime.
Definitely. The last kind of thing that I'll mention about the broadcast is the delay. For competitive integrity, a lot of times the broadcast will be, 3, 5, 10 minutes behind actual gameplay, so that you can preserve the competitive integrity of the game and making sure that nobody's cheating or has an advantage. Up next, if we kind of talk about, what is the TO's role during the day, during the actual event? Obviously keeping tabs on the schedule is a huge part of what you're going to do when you're a tournament runner. Posting results in a spot that's visible for not only, your spectators to keep track of, who's doing well, where are people at in the tournament, but also, who the teams are playing next. I know, Dana, you typically create a Discord server for the tournament and be able to post results there for the teams. When we did the tournament here in Moorhead, I had like a giant piece of paper that we hung on a wall and filled in the bracket as we went for the spectators to see where things were. So there's a couple of different ways that you can kind of keep things visible and making sure that everybody knows, okay, where's the tournament going. But how do you handle, Dana, the other responsibilities during the day? Like maybe rule disputes or, making sure that you're on schedule. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah, I think that also comes from having just a pre-tournament meeting. I typically gather all teams and participants, coaches, staff. You make sure everybody's on the same page. You understand that, hey, this is the schedule. We're starting at this time. You have X amount of time. You know that we schedule out for games. And then if you are late to your game, you then getting maybe bans, right? If you're not in the game and you're not at your chair between the next match and you know that this is the rule, you will start to lose bans. I would say also when you're disputing or making sure that when the problems do arise, it happens a lot. Players will say, well, this person paused the game and they can only have so many pauses, which is true, right? Like those are the things you have to make sure that you're staying on track with and making sure that they're legitimate, right? And it's not something that is like a cheating mechanism. Now, cheating sometimes can be a little bit harder to detect because people can have to be very sneaky about that stuff. But also making sure that the players who are at the event are the ones actually playing. I think that's a big one that a lot of people are starting to realize is something that they have to actually check. And don't know. I'm trying to think of all the crazy scenarios I've ever encountered, but you just don't know what you're going to get thrown at you those days. Also, there will be maybe coin flips that have to happen if we have to go to a tiebreaker, right? How do we explain that to the players? Because sometimes they don't quite fully understand how it works. And then you're like, no, you didn't read the rules and this is how it is. And that can actually get a team knocked out from being in the semifinals. It's just all these different kind of things. And as a TO, you just have to be firm in your decisions and understand that, your word is what's going. And whatever you set precedents for is the way and the flow that the event is going to happen. People know that I don't like to be behind, so they know that they have to be there between their 10 minutes of the game and you're starting on the dot. It's extremely important, especially in esports. It's never been something that it's more like of a lollygag at a lot of LAN events, and that's not how it flies anymore. So yeah, I guess if there's any questions about being a TO, feel free to pop those in the chat. I'm happy to answer. But overall, it is your duty to make sure that it runs smooth.
Yeah. What are some of the common issues that you specifically look out for during the day when the tournament is going on?
Yeah, I'm always watching internet connection and electrical. I don't most people are probably more worried about the gameplay, but for me, it's about making sure that that works, because if we're having any type of lag, I have to fix that. I have to also know if like a breaker goes out. I've had a breaker go out before because it got overheated because um, one of the outlets, didn't have the proper surge protecting on it, right? So it's just like little stuff like that that you just have to be prepared for. I would say internet latency is definitely my big one though too, because it is the difference in how the games are going to function. Do we have to take a break and reset the switch? Like, what's happening? Do I need to call the provider? Like, is it a bigger issue? Making sure that your internet speed was good too, right? Prior, you got to make sure that you knew what you were getting into that building before you even put an event on.
Sure.
Yeah.
What about some online things to keep a look for? Obviously running a tournament in person, a lot of those same principles will apply to an online event. The things like being firm in those ruling decisions and making sure that you're on schedule and things like that. But are there any unique scenarios that you need to consider when running an online tournament?
I would say that is just making sure that it's truthful players behind the computers. Having those teams, making sure that they're not having somebody else playing on a role that's not at their own facility, right? We've seen it happen. We've seen online tournaments where people say that they're playing, but it's actually somebody else in a different location, different IP address, right? Now that stuff like at the K-12 level, we're not worrying about, or even rarely the collegiate level, but at the pro level, it's an issue. Major differences between that live and online. I think it is very nice though with online that you can get through games pretty quickly. But you also can be very delayed. Sometimes teams don't even realize that there's a time difference, and that's a problem. So just petty little things like that. But overall, you are definitely able to make efficient tournaments in both live and online.
Awesome. Yeah, the different time zone thing is unique, and that's not something that every time you have to worry about. But in a state like I live in Fargo, North Dakota, where the eastern half of the state is in the central time zone. But if you go past Williston or out west into past Dickinson and the western part of the state, they're in the mountain time zone. So even within our own state, the K-12 schools have to worry about a time difference in some areas. Jeff has another question here. How should tournament handle accusations of cheating with an online event?
Okay, handling the accusations. Ultimately, it's more than likely you're not going to be able to probably fix it as it's happening, maybe. But you would need to be able to either run some sort of IP address test and get those from a reliable party at those other schools. That's just kind of like on a goodwill type of basis, wouldn't you say, Josh?
Yeah, it is a really hard thing, especially with the cheating thing. When you're not all in the same building, it's a lot harder to prove. I think having a third party that can maybe look into things is something that gets used in professional play. A review afterwards. There was just a big CSGO ban that got handed out today. There were 35 players that got banned for cheating or using lag and looking at reviews and things, having the stream up on a monitor in a different room. That's really hard to prove, especially in a very short amount of time. But I think one of the big things that can be looked at is if you have a TO or a group, say we're, the statewide commission that's running our tournament, and it's online, having a vote and having, more than one person take a look at the situation, use the resources that you do have and be able to come to a decision. And then just kind of being as firm as you can in that decision-making process. And, when you set precedent, make sure that you're falling back on that. But it is really hard to prove cheating. And maybe it's something that you take a look at after the round is over, you pause the tournament, the next round has a little bit of time before you get started. You have a more holistic look at that last round. You can maybe then determine if there was cheating and make a ruling before the next round starts. And that might take, pausing the tournament as a whole to make sure that you're dealing with the situation that might come up. But it definitely is a lot harder to prove or to deal with when it is online. And that's a consideration that has to be made. I think especially in the K-12 world, it's not something that we see a whole lot. And having a teacher in the room or with the players, if my high school is playing Dana's high school and we're both the teachers or the sponsors of the programs, making sure that we are in the room and being as impartial in that moment as we can, making sure that our players are following the rules. And then, if something does happen where it's a little fishy, submitting an appeal to whoever is running the tournament, and then just being as upfront as you can about it is kind of the easiest way to go about it. But it's a great question, Jeff. I wish I had a better answer for you. But long story short,
at that K-12 and college level too.
Yeah,
we're not seeing a ton of this happening. It's more at that pro level where it's like on the softwares that they're putting on computers, and then they're able to actually trace it back. It's definitely difficult.
Mm-hmm. Okay, real quickly, let's talk about clinics and stuff. Keep the questions coming. We do have the Q&A set up. We've got about 10 minutes left, so we'll kind of speed run through the next one because I think a lot of the same things apply. When you look at like a clinic or a conference and you talk about the schedule, a lot of the biggest things are, how long is your event going to be? Well, that's going to be dictated by how long you have the venue for, or, are we virtual and can spread it out online because we have different speaking slots and we can just jump in Zoom? If we're in person, how long do we have the building or the room? How long each session will take? That's something that you can kind of decide, and really depends on how many speakers you have in the lineup, how many breakout sessions do you have. Those can be really flexible, but I think the important thing to remember is do as much pre-planning as possible to be able to set these things in stone long before you even announce the event. If you can kind of get your schedule roughly in place before you start marketing and having people sign up and register, that's going to go a long way to making sure that your event is successful. And things to include, breaks definitely are definitely important. You don't want to have an hour-long session, a 60-minute session butted right up against another 60-second or 60-minute section, especially if they are in different rooms in a venue hall or something like that. So maybe it's a 50-minute section and then you have 10 minutes to go to the next event or the next room for your next hour session or whatever that might be. Are meals provided? That kind of applies to the tournaments too. Do you have concessions, and do you have, is there a break for meals? Are they going to be at the venue? Do you need to give more time for people to go off site? Those are kind of things that you'll look at in the schedule as far as getting things wrapped up beforehand. And maybe the venue and, the people that you're working with, if you are renting a space, can help you with that. Maybe they have an in-house catering team that's going to be able to provide a meal, or they can kind of set aside food to where, it might not be during normal meal hours, but they can provide things for you based on your event schedule and maybe not like their daily schedule. The number of rooms and sessions, your budget is going to be a big determining factor there. Can we afford to rent out 5, 6, 7 rooms and be able to have sessions all going at the same time? If you can do that, well, then that means you get that many more sessions to build into the schedule and be able to have. I would highly recommend putting an Excel sheet together with different room names and speaking slots in there. That's going to make your life really easy. And that's a tool that I'm sure everybody is really familiar with, and just kind of keeping things organized. Dana, anything to add on kind of schedule or venue when it comes to a clinic or classic conference style event?
I do think that one of the things with meals included or planned for is important as well, because in that registration, most times you're going to be able to package that into the registration fee. So it's not like it has to be an additional fee. Just lump it into your entry fee. And then that also gives a little bit more value add to your event. We do that for people who register for the actual gaming side as well as the clinic side. And people really enjoy that. We also host a like networking session that gives free drinks. We get 2 drink tickets, and this is for you to enjoy for however long you want at that night to hang out with everybody. So there's just like all these little value adds that you can add to make your event be memorable.
Definitely. Hospitality, kind of the same thing. What amenities are you planning for or providing? Kind of making sure that people have a good experience when they come. It'll be a really great indication of if you can handle doing that event again. If people are happy and want to come back, that definitely says something about your organization. And making sure that things go smoothly and people are treated with respect, I think is definitely a big thing. Speaker hospitality, are you providing a way for them to send their equipment early, if they have like a bigger presentation with a lot of gear, talking to them about, okay, what are you speaking on? What are your needs as far as your presentation goes? Do you need a projector or a microphone or things like that? Those are conversations that you'll typically have before the event as much as possible. And then just, having volunteers that can fill in and be able to, help out with that, particular session. Maybe having a volunteer assigned to a speaker throughout the day or the week as just a point of contact is always a good idea. That way, if you do have people driving in from other cities or if they're flying in from a different part of the country, they know what to expect. And if they have questions, they have somebody to go to that might not necessarily be like, Dana, the TO, who's off running around making sure that teams are on schedule. Having a team built around you is a really good way to kind of separate these responsibilities, and it'll make your life easier as the person who's running the event. And it'll also, give people the opportunity to lend a helping hand. As far as funding goes for a conference like this, definitely vending fees or venue fees are always a big thing. Catering, what giveaways are you doing? All those things are going to be costs. Do you need to raise money? Are you going to ask local businesses for sponsorships or donations? Maybe, are you paying your speakers? Are they donating their time to come in? Those are things that you'll have to think about when building out a larger clinic or conference. And that's about it. We've got about 4 minutes left for questions. I know we covered a ton of info and it was a lot of, just word vomit as far as like information goes, but I think it's a really big topic that we could probably sit here and talk about for, another 4 hours. So if anybody has other questions, please feel free now to throw them in the Q&A section or the chat. And if you have things that pop up later, Dana and I's contact info is on the screen. Feel free to text or call me or send me an email anytime. Follow me on Twitter. I post stuff all the time there. Would love to connect if you have questions that we don't get to tonight. Dana, anything to add while people might be typing out some questions? What is your follow-up to an event is a great question.
Yeah, so typically we actually record our sessions as well as send out surveys for each panel speaker. How did the speaker do? What would you change? Like, you do your typical survey. And that's how we build on it for the next year. What kind of topics do you want to see for the next year is really important to us. We're trying to always stay at top of the game. And then also our follow-up is just always making sure, like with the teams, hey, how did your experience go? What do we need to do better in scheduling? Do you want to see a different format? There's just so many different things that we take into consideration as we continue to build off of it. And then also in the follow-up, I would say a lot of like the vendors or sponsors sometimes like to send thank yous as well.
Yeah, I've got nothing to add. That's a great response to that. And I think just being thorough and making sure that, you're collecting as much information as possible to help next year be better. That might look very different depending on the kind of event that you run, but it's always a good practice to especially talk to your sponsors and the people that are helping out, and then definitely the teams that are participating.
This is kind of a silly thing that I remembered, but for players, if you want to make something a little bit memorable for K-12 or collegiate or whatever it is, it's a really big thing in esports to have cool name tag lanyards. People collect these. They think it's neat when you have like a really neat, the cool lanyard with the nice bold name on it or something neat that they can take home and keep. It's definitely a thing that esports people do.
Yeah, definitely. And that goes into an RGB lanyard. Yeah.
There you go.
Light it up with LEDs. You just get a roll of LED strips and put them on the lanyard. But yeah, and so thanks everybody for joining us tonight. We had a great time. Thank you, Dana, for lending your expertise and kind of running through all of the different experiences that you've had. Thanks again to everybody who attended. We can't wait to see you all here next week. We're doing this back to back. So next week on February 3rd, same time, 7 p.m. Central, we'll have Teddy Delaney. He's the director of esports at Lackawanna College out in Pennsylvania. He'll be joining me to talk about fundraising. I know Chris just put the APS Twitter handle. I know we have a lot of people from Albuquerque Public Schools that are going to be on that one. So we look forward to seeing you guys next week. And we'll talk about how to fund your program and different ways to get sponsorship and actually be able to pay for things. So hope to see everybody there. And, everybody, thank you so much. A big shout out again to Microsoft. Thank you for sponsoring Esports Ed. And we'll see you next week.